Okay. I did a bit of research and found that companies with strong cross functional collaboration are five times more likely to be high performing than their peers. However, many organizations struggle with silos that hinder communication and impede growth. In fact, I came across a study that found that 86% of employees and executives cite a lack of collaboration or ineffective communication as the primary reason for workplace failures. Other research that I came across also indicates that poor collaboration can lead to a staggering 30% reduction in productivity. And a survey by McKinsey found that organizations with effective cross functional collaboration are five times more likely to be able to achieve their goals. Despite all these challenges with siloed departments and inefficient processes, which can stymie growth and innovation, how do we solve for that? I guess there's a few ideas, and we'll explore that in a bit. But first, hello, welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, brought to you by Sproutwith.com. I'm Vinay Koshy, and our guest is Alex Natskovich. Alex, you head up MEV, which is a software strategic partner for software development for companies worldwide. Could you tell us a bit about your background and what led you to create MEV as it is today?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Vinay. So we've been around for quite a long time, and when I was starting this company, that was 2006, close to 20 years now. Back then, I think the prevailing experience was outsourcing any type of software development work, whether that's just kind of execution project or really more complex innovation type, was predominantly suboptimal experience. And what I found really is a lot of that it's not necessarily because people who are doing it are bad professionals or something like that, but quite often it's really not understanding the client needs deeply enough. And so I started experimenting with it a little bit. I had a few kind of clients that I work with, and really my ability to dig deeper into the business side of things. I'm an engineer by trade, right? So I was coming from to that from I was engineering background, and my motto was always try to understand the why people want to do what they want to do, and having that in mind really helped me to start building pretty successful software projects pretty quickly on the lower end of the sort of budget spectrums that client had. And one thing led to another, and really business started to grow. And I thought maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something that this could be turned into. And this has been like the driving force behind our success is really that deeper understanding of clients' needs and really orientation towards creating value, like the real value, and quite often that lies beyond to what people will tell you they want to do. So that's how we started. We've been around for a long time, so that the company went through many different transformations throughout this time frame. And going back to the point that you brought in terms of cross-functional collaboration and really having teams and people work together to achieve a common goal, right? So this is very broad and complex issue. I think us as like human species, we have this unique feature. We collaborate, right? We do things together towards common goal. But now we have a new dimension of it. How do you do that with very large organizations? Going back to antiquity, maybe you had 100 people. Now you have companies with thousands of people, right? Trying to do something. So aligning that all of that effort towards a common goal is extremely difficult challenge. So to me, over years, I build, and I don't want to say I'm some kind of expert in that. Definitely not. But I made a lot of mistakes, I would say, in that. And they taught me a few lessons and helped me to really maybe get a little bit better at it. And I like to look at collaboration in terms of three dimensions, right? So this is really people, process, and tools. And with people, this is the most important aspect of it, right? Who do you have on your team? And who do you have with your team really? We're really talking about the culture here, right? So there's certainly the professional aspect of it, like in terms of do you have like true professionals on your team? That's important. But also, how do they work together, right? How do you get to the state where two plus two equals five, right? Or more, or 10 maybe, right? So this type of collaboration really, I feel, successful collaboration, I feel rooted in having very well defined and common culture, and your hiring processes, your sort of team building processes, they all oriented towards putting the right personalities together, right? The people who contribute to each other, people who have same or similar, same is maybe too strong, similar values that all contribute to that positive team dynamic, right? So when you have one team like that, when you have another team like that, obviously it's easier for them if they all share sort of common culture, common values, and by culture, like company culture. It is easier for them to collaborate, especially if that culture is oriented towards collaboration, right? The culture that is oriented towards transparency, right? Towards communication in a way that is practical, right? Communication in a way that is oriented towards really accomplishing that goal. So if you have those elements, now you start to unlock that. But this is where I feel like the second component of this framework comes in place. When you have more than a few people, you really need a process. So having somebody who is dedicated to owning that part, to owning the process, I found that to be very helpful in building this cross-functional collaboration teams, right? So I'm talking in our space, it's Agile, right? So Agile development methodology has been on for quite a while. There's a lot of different frameworks and sort of commercial ways to do it right, so to speak. But if you go back to the principles, I think those principles are quite important. And if you have somebody who understands both the principles of Agile as well as all the different tools that are available, such a person having the right sort of mandate to really own the process, remove the blockers, ensure collaboration is effective, right? Ensure that there are feedback loops to both teams or multiple teams, and really look holistically at the whole system, at the whole kind of multifunctional collaboration as a system. I think in this case now you have an opportunity to really get that machinery to work well, right? Because you essentially have a single person who understands how one team works, how another team works, how a third team works, and so forth. So you have a person who understands like what should there be, right? And has potentially a roadmap towards getting there, right? So it's not, hey, here's a bunch of teams, let's guys all work together nicely, right? No, you have a single person who looks at it all and says, oh, you know what? This team actually prevents this other team to work well because they deliver things in a certain way that is suboptimal, right? Because maybe they don't really understand what this other team is talking about when they talk about like their specialty. Like a good example would be design team collaborating with engineering team, right? Like designers have their own way of doing things and you have their own way of doing things. This sort of cross-functional collaboration you can really improve on if you focus on like
Okay.
specific handoff procedures, but you also focus on like how people communicate. Do they really understand each other or it's very surface? So having a person who's responsible for that and understand that all of these dynamics is extremely helpful. And the last component of this model to me is tools. This is the least important, frankly speaking, but it's still the one that I feel quite often people just default to a particular set of tools and don't really pay too much attention. And what I found is, and this is, I think, comes from like engineering background, because as an engineer, I was a very lazy person and I tried to automate everything possible. Like I would write very short scripts to do like bunch of things. I would have very short commands. So I think the same thing is applicable to many different disciplines where if you look at something and you look at it, you look deeply like what value my activity creates, right? And if you're doing something that's very routine, that's very sort of repeatable, but spending a lot of time on it, like, does that really create value here? Does it also help me as an individual to express myself correct? And quite often, tools being that's just thrown out there and people not really paying active attention to them, they prevent the teams and individual teams and multiple teams to fully realize their values or to fully contribute the time that they have towards the outcome organization needs. And so having somebody, and quite often that falls back to that role I spoke about, the person who's responsible for process, paying enough attention to the tool component to say, you know what, like we need something else here. We need a better tool here for collaboration. Maybe you guys need a better tool here for some specific activity. Like this takes too much time. Let's find a way to automate it. Like having those conversations, and maybe at the end of it, everybody would come to it and say, you know what, no, let's just stick with what we have. Works great. We don't need anything else. That's fine. But having that dialogue, I think, and ideally having a feedback loop in that aspect really helps people use right tools and use them in the right way. So that's the model I've in my career I've been honing over the years and found it works quite well and quite pragmatic and helps really create the right environment for that collaboration
Hmm.
to grow. So,
Given your journey to date, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
so for me, having that engineering background really helps me to understand the realm of possibilities. I certainly haven't done any hardcore engineering in a long time, but I know tech
Mhm.
quite deep enough to be able to figure out different technical problems
Okay.
quickly. On the other side, I always was interested in business, right? So it's if engineering is my kind of like true passion, business is really something that kind of like I've been curious about it
Mhm.
since I was a kid. Combining these two things together really helps me to navigate world of sort of business issues quite quickly and really help clients be like a really true
Mhm.
trusted advisor in a way, a person who they can turn to discuss problems they have and opportunities they see, but in a language that's comfortable for them. And what I can do is really translate it to the language of engineering world and help them very quickly to understand, yes, this is possible, this is roughly how it could look, right? This is so that I feel has been really area of strength for me, and this has been definitely area that helped us as an organization to continue working, continue growing, and really servicing our clients like true needs and really delivering value at the right level of sort of
In
attention.
that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
Depends on the industry because a lot of times every industry have their own unique things and unique challenges they come across. And one thing that I think would really be helpful quite often for business leaders that I had opportunity to work with and in general I feel like is having just a broader understanding of not just your business but other types of industries as well, and maybe seeing some of the cross-pollinating some of the ideas
Mhm.
from other spaces, right? Oh, like here's this problem, maybe you feel like it's quite unique to your space, but chances are some other industry already solved that problem, or some other industry underwent this type of transformation you're maybe experiencing, or some opportunity that arose, somebody somewhere maybe solved it. So that having that kind of open mindset to start looking for solutions and having a broad understanding of what's going on in other spaces, I think that helps quite a lot. And it helps to really ask the right questions, but it also helps to short circuit some of those explorations in terms of like,
Mhm.
how do I solve this issue? How do I capitalize on this opportunity? So that's definitely one thing. The other thing that certainly is helpful, but I don't really have an answer to how to solve this problem is finding the right partners to help you navigate
Hmm.
some of the challenging areas. And because I can't tell you how many times we would come across a client and the situation that we're in is really caused by quite often working with just wrong vendors for them, right? And there's quite often there's no fault of a vendor specifically. It's this there's not really anybody's fault, but quite often you as a client not being really specific enough and maybe in a
Mhm.
way picky enough to find really the right fit for what you're trying to execute, and just going with like maybe the cheapest bid or maybe the one that like you feel good about but there's not really much to substantiate that with, it leads you towards the very negative outcome. And we had a lot of situations like that where we had to basically salvage some piece of technology or really help execute the turnaround for a company if maybe like another company is buying them or a PE firm is buying them. So that the I don't really know how to necessarily solve it, but this is something that I personally try to think about very critically. How do you really find the right fit for a specific
Mhm.
problem space, right? Yeah. So those couple of things that I think quite often I see people don't really pay enough attention to, and I think
That's interesting because, from my own experience, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, I often find that, at least in some organizations, there isn't necessarily a clear understanding of the problem that they're trying to solve or the issue that needs
yeah.
to be addressed. And I'd love to hear your perspective of what it's like for you coming in or being approached to solve what they believe is a problem that really hasn't been fleshed out very well internally. How do you address it and how do you guide them through this journey of better understanding what's at stake?
Yeah, no, that's a good Good question. The way I look at things when somebody approaches us with a specific problem, quite often it's not just that, they also quite often approach us with
Hmm.
specific solution in mind, right? So you both have maybe a problem definition, but also a solution definition. And more often than not, the solution is off mark a little bit in some respect, maybe not necessarily fully, but in some respect it is. And the reason for that is twofold. One is because potentially problem is not defined clear enough, right? Or
Hmm.
it's not validated that it's actually a problem. But secondly, the way people arrive at a solution doesn't really factor in all of the constraints of real world situation, right? So maybe they think, oh, like we can build this very quickly, or we can build this very cheaply. Or conversely, we need to spend a lot of money to build this very complex system where in fact very simple system or even a tool would solve this underlying business need. And so the way, like, it's two different problems, right? But I think there's one solution, and this is really what I try to get is I try to get first and foremost to a level of communication, a level of relationship where they professional but trusting enough that I can actually start asking hard questions and start validating some of the assumptions. So first you need to really get to the assumptions, like, okay, what are you trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it? Like, how do you know that this is actually a problem, right? How do you know that the way you envision it's going to work is going to work for your organization? What are some things you're not thinking about? So obviously, if somebody walks in the door, you can't just start asking those questions because they would be very quickly on the defensive, and that's very bad situation to be in. You're not really helping anybody. But really, initially, it might mean you need to play along with the client, right? Okay, let's, like, you want to build a system, let us actually start defining what that is. And in this process, as we working with them, as we trying to understand them deeper, they see that we trying to dig deeper, not because of our sort of interest, but because we want to help them. So it always, like, we try to understand you first and foremost so that we can figure out a better solution. We actually have a separate value, the company value, that we call true ally, that is talking specifically about this, that one of our values is really we try to be true ally for you. And it quite often may mean telling you something that you don't want to hear, but that you need to hear so you can
Hmm.
be successful, right? And so we try to get to the level of communication where that conversation is possible. And then gradually start to actually validating some of the deeper assumptions, getting to maybe a better definition of the problem, more constraints, more real world constraints. And then from there, evolving the solution towards where it is as optimal as a solution as possible, given the set of constraints, given the ultimate goal of the system you're trying to build, or opportunity you're trying to capitalize on, or whatever. And then this collaboration really helps us to find the end product for the client that serves their true needs. We had a number of examples where that actually happened, and what quite often what ends up happening is we end up building something that is much cheaper than they had in mind. It's much simpler than what they have in mind, but it actually does everything that the business actually needed. So I quite often joke that my job is to be anti-salesperson. Like, I try to convince you to do less
Hmm.
than what are you asking to do, because quite often people they want to do too
Hmm.
much. They just want to do too much at once, and if you dig deeper into it, you sometimes to see, you know what, it sure would be happy to build so
Hmm.
much software for you, but you're not going to need half of it. So let's just focus on a simple thing here that's really the core of the value that you're trying to create. We do that first, and then if there's more needs down the line, or if it's really starts to validate some of the assumptions you make, and then we can build something else.
If I understand this correctly, True Ally is a separate company to MEV, and they have
This is one of
values.
our
Okay,
values, right? So
right,
this is, we have
right.
four core
Okay.
values for the companies, right? So this is what we trying to really
Hmm.
make sure everybody on the team kind of living up to those values, and
Okay.
this is very important for us to get to
So
that level of relationship
Um,
with
uh,
everybody.
what you're talking about is terrific, but I would imagine there needs to be a level of trust in order for them to certainly approach you as well as to
Yeah.
engage in this kind of discussion that you're describing. What would you say goes into that piece around trust that your clients have towards you? Certainly, your experience lends to that. But are there other dimensions that
Yeah.
you could speak to?
Yeah, building trust is key for sure. And the way we build it, I think, is we're trying to stay true to our values really here. And we always build very transparent communication. We don't hide anything or anybody. Like with us, as a client is not only welcome to, but we actually want them to speak to every single team member they're working with, collaborate as much as possible. And we also want to be professional, right? So we do our homework. We put a lot of effort into deeper understanding like what clients need. We provide a lot of documentation. Quite often when we work with clients, like the depths that we go through, it's not
Mhm.
just verbal. There's artifacts that show in it. Like, there are artifacts that show like we consider this and this, like this is. So now with this shared material we can have very substantive discussions. It's not just like gonna get on the phone and spinning things around. No, like we very meticulously, systematically go through different stages of defining a problem, right? And that's actually
Mhm.
going back to this process, right? We have quite specific process how we address it, and each phase of it we have something, we have an output essentially that clients can see and can feel good about because they understand
Mhm.
how we arrive at certain thing, right? If we made a mistake, it's clear we can go back. We listen to feedback very carefully, right? We always try to understand the feedback, implement the feedback. Quite often, one of the sort of anti patterns in Agile that I see in some Agile teams that I come across is they have feedback loops, like retrospective sessions they call them, but nothing
Mhm.
happens after that. So everybody get together, complain about this and this, and that's it. It just keeps on going. Like we take every single thing very seriously and try to address and improve, and we welcome it, right? So that's another important thing. And when people start working with us, they see the level of communication, they see the level of transparency, they see that we listen to them, we're improving, we want to help them win. This is actually a company mission: help businesses win with the right technology. And so through this collaboration, it starts to show. And those are the building blocks of the trust to us. As we go and work more with clients, as we communicate with them more in this fashion, as we create value for them, they start to understand that yes, okay, we can have deeper discussions now. They start to understand where we're coming from, right? It's not from the positions like we want more of your business, right? It's at the positions like we want to help
Mhm.
you really win. Because in this case, what I feel is our interests are truly aligned. Because if you're winning, you're gonna come back to us for more
Mhm.
things, and we're winning too. We're gonna help you win even more, and you can. It's like a very symbiotic relationship. This is what we want to get to, and this is why why this approach is important to us. Yeah. So those are some of the ways we use to really get to deeper level of trust and deeper level of collaboration.
Certainly,
So
at least a few instances, assembling a team is not just enough. There is a need for a robust process. You're obviously
yes.
collaborating not just with engineering teams. I would think you're also inviting the broader segments or departments within the organization into the conversation as well.
Mhm.
What does that look like, especially in cultures where there is very much a siloed type mentality within the organization?
Yeah, this is a big challenge to navigate, especially in very large organizations. As you mentioned, Russell, with startups and SMB folks, it's a little bit easier because teams are smaller. They already have a certain degree of understanding, like what's going on. With big companies and big teams, it is quite difficult for sure. I think over years, what we learned is when when we really need some kind of a interdepartmental collaboration with a big client, and we have a number of very large organizations for our clients, we first and foremost want to make sure we share enough of the context with the other team, and we share all of the goals and what we're doing and why we're doing, right? So they have all the information that they need to really work with us effectively, right? We also want to make sure that we are not wasting their time,
Mhm.
right? So that means we are very prepared for meetings. There's an agenda always. We always prepare all the materials ahead of time. It means that when we get on a phone with them, we're very respectful of time boundaries. We're trying to work with the schedule, and we're trying to really make them feel like they're contributing towards like a common outcome that is
Mhm.
important for them as well. And in this specific, like that specific one, right, the importance of outcome to a team, this is where we really need to work with whoever our champion is, right? Let's say we're working with VP of engineering and we need a champion is, right? With a CIO, for example, team, right? So maybe we need to collaborate with a great team. Definitely, if we just come to it cold and cold, that's not gonna go anywhere, right?
Mhm.
So we want to first and foremost, whoever our main point of contact, to help establish that communication and help understand why we're doing what we're doing, like why it's needed, why is it important for the company. Maybe we create all of those materials that the VP of engineering is sharing, right? And we help him communicate it very specifically, but his or her authority needs to be there to really open that door, right? Next step for us is very important, going back to the structure, not wasting people's time, being
Mhm.
very organized, right? So that does another thing, it helps them to see that we're really true professionals, and everybody want to work with true professionals, right? So when you start collaborating with a professional team like that, you start building the same, you also start building trust, right? And so now you understand, oh, like these guys not going to waste my time, they're going to help achieve this goal, I'm going to work with them, I can trust them to
Mhm.
do the right thing, not to screw things up. And so we see, once we start doing this in a consistent way, people and different departments who we don't normally work with, they open up and they work much easier with us. They show up for dialogue, right? They help us understand their
Mhm.
predicament much better. And so we understand it and we adjust whatever we need to adjust so their work can be done easier. So this is same philosophy essentially, just a little bit different angle. And the sort of interesting side effect that it creates is now it makes us a better partner for VP of engineering, because he knows that we have a relationship with CIO team or with legal team, and we can execute something
Mhm.
much easier compared to maybe another company or maybe another a team within the work that doesn't have that relationship. So you start becoming this kind of interesting glue between different departments that can get things done better. And so they would tend to come to us and say, hey, you know what, we need to execute this initiative. I normally wouldn't give it to you, but because you have all these relationships, because how
Mhm.
legal works or how procurement works or how IT works, I know you guys can do it, so here it is, right? So this is why this aspect is also very important for us as a company. Like it helps us to be a better partner for our,
What you say certainly makes a lot of sense. However, as you scale and work with different companies, this can seem to get quite overwhelming. So I'm curious, how do you document and keep this knowledge current? Because changes do occur sometimes when leaders within organizations change.
yeah.
So how do you stay across this level of not just process and hierarchy, but also the way communications best flows in order to be, as you described, that glue within an organization?
It's certainly another challenging issue to solve. The way we approach it is we have like multiple levels that we interact with the client, right? So obviously the team itself who's doing the work, they quite often work with clients very closely. And we always try to build a collaboration where we're not just a team that you just throw stuff over the fence to and they throw stuff back at you. It's we try to build relationships at all levels, right? So everybody try to talk to everybody. So that helps us to understand what's going on at kind of operational level. Then above the soul, we have typically a delivery manager who owns the kind of engagement, right? Who interacts with maybe a project manager on a client, right? Maybe some key stakeholders. So they also see things that's going on. They're aware of the plans, and because of the way we build relationship, quite quickly we get to be viewed as more of a strategic partner. So clients, they share their plans with us essentially without us even asking. Like they would come and say, "Hey, here's our roadmap for next year."
Mhm.
Right, here's like your role in it. So because again, going back to the beginning of our discussion, we build the trust, we dig deeper, so they start to say, oh, that's an important information for them to know. Sometimes it doesn't happen. And what I do typically in those situations, I try to find the right person in the hierarchy, go to them and say, hey, like this is important for us. Here is why. It will help us work better. It will help your team better. Let's start doing this. We want to understand like what do you have in store, right? What are
Mhm.
you planning for the next year, right? We want to understand your business situation. Okay. And there's a third level there. Typically, an account manager would have a relationship a little bit higher up the stack, and they would be somebody who really needs to be aware of all of this sort of a leadership changes, strategic changes. But it's the same principle. You try to be helpful, you try to be respectful all the time, you learn as much as you can about the business from the people in the business, but also from outside sources. So you understand both sides of it, right? What's in house, what's going on in house, but also from like the public side. So it's not really a magic bullet, right? Not a silver bullet. But if you're consistent with this, if you really, in my experience, if you come to it from a perspective of I want to help the client better, right? That helps. That helps quite a bit, and people feel it, and they share this information with you because they see that if they do that, you can help them execute something better.
And I wonder if you could describe perhaps a scenario, or not a scenario, but from your experience with a client, how you have helped them with their processes as well as produce a solution that has impacted them positively.
Mhm. Yeah. So when we start working with companies, quite often one of the, not like the main selling point, but I would say an unintentional side effect is we bring software development processes that are quite a bit more mature than what organizations typically had, especially if it's sort of a startup, maybe if it's an SM. And so what ends up happening is they look at how we do things and they start to borrow some of these processes, some of these approaches, right? And sometimes they're even very explicit about it. They would work for us for half a year and they would say, oh, you guys seem to do this particular thing very well. Can you help our other team to actually do this thing well, right? And so, and the other team would also see this because they collaborate closely with them. Again, going back to the previous point, we try to really integrate with the clients. And so this is, we don't like, that's not a service we offer. We don't really do process management as a service or like agile development consulting. Like that's not really what we do. But by the virtue of us actually being there and working in a particular way and also constantly improving that process, right? This is another thing that we're trying to do from our side. Many times companies would just basically start adapting to the way we do things. The other way we really help clients evolve their processes where we see there's maybe something that prevents organization from being successful because maybe a team, another team is really not very effective, let's call it that. So this is much harder discussions, right? When you come to clients and say, hey, you know what, your infrastructure team is really making this whole organization like they're slowing everything down, right? Let's deal with this, right? Like, imagine having that conversation with a CEO of the client, right? What? You're some kind of a dev shop telling me my guys are bad? What the heck, right? It's only possible if A, you really truly demonstrated your value and your expertise, and B, you have this very trusting relationship. And you also need not, you must not be afraid to escalate it, right? Maybe it stays unresolved. But at the very least, you bring that awareness to the leadership about, hey, like there's a better way to get done what you need to get done. There's a way to increase the speed of your organization. And so that's another way where I don't want to say this is happens quite often, but it does happen every now and then where we have to really escalate something and say, hey, let's fix this in your org so we all can be successful here. Yeah, those are a couple of different ways we kind of affect processes quite often.
Okay. Take it your approach involves iterative development. Would that be correct? So the
Say again?
processes that you employ to bring a product to market involves iterative development. Is that correct? Yep. As you engage with that, what sort of key metrics are you looking for or establishing to measure the success of a iterative development process?
There's, if you look at the sort of agile methodologies, there's a lot of different, there's scaled agile, there's disciplined agile, there's like some other ones. And they all have different ways to measure success, right? And they all have applicability to one case or another case. So really for us, it's finding the right combination of what's the best practices and what's relevant to the client, right? If you're working with a startup and they really need to build an MVP very quickly, very cheaply, then measuring like your release velocity or story points may not be that useful, right? But if you're working with a large organization, they already have a product, they already done many years of innovation. It's a team of teams type situation. There needs to be a lot of alignment. Like in this case, you would have a different approach. You may focus on things that are more geared towards building kind of a sustainable development process and a predictable one where if they plan something, they know it's going to get done in this quarter or in this month, right? Very consistently. But for startups, it's quite often not the case. They just need to get it done, like ASAP, and all of this other things that all of this other effort that would go into making the process to be more predictable in a way, right? Or to foster like cross team collaboration. That is not really needed because the team is small. It's very clear what needs to be done. It just needs to be done. So metrics there need to be quite different. And we always try to align towards that. So quite often with small engagements, we really just measuring, are we making sufficient enough progress against the roadmap and the vision? So are we executing stories at the right pace? Are we really hitting everything? All the risks managed? Are we being on time and on budget? So those are the things that we would measure with smaller engagements. With larger ones, there's all of that is also important, but it's also important to understand that in a longer term, because the time horizon is bigger, right? So we're talking about ongoing development, like multi-year projects, right? Building a product versus building a project. So here, what we want to do is we want to make sure that some of those operational metrics are more optimized. Like how long does it take us to really deploy to production? How long does each product increment take? Are we really hitting all of the elements on a quarterly roadmap, monthly roadmap, right? Build good processes for estimation. Are we, when we estimating, are we within the range that we estimated? And if we're not, like, can we get back to it? Can we hit closer to the lower end of the spectrum? So this goes back to really building like the right
Mm.
engineering culture within your organization and measuring the right things. Because another anti-pattern is if you measure the wrong things, you incentivize the wrong behavior. I always want to be very careful with metrics because very often they
Mm.
misfire. And the other thing is metrics can really tell you something, but they quite often can't tell you the full story. So to me, they metrics are a little bit of a secondary to things like feedback loops, for example, because I really want to hear feedback from the clients, from the users, from different stakeholders, and that is more important than saying that yeah, we're hitting like 95% of story points or our velocity at such and such level, or we releasing product increment every 2 weeks or continuously. All those things are important, but they're not primary for me. Really, the feedback loop, what users are saying, are we creating value? What customers are saying? Like what engineers are saying? Are they inspired? Are they motivated? Are they engaged? All those things are more important to me than
Yeah,
a set of
interesting
metrics.
point there. Could you tell us about a client project that surprised you the most as a result of its impact?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, we had one. I can't really share the name because it's a very
Sure.
like big, well-known brand, but I guarantee you encounter it every day in your life. It's a sort of fashion brand. And so what we done with them, it started out as a very small project for us where we were responsible for essentially implementing a piece of middleware. And we didn't really kind of pay a whole lot of attention to it from any opportunity perspective. We would come in and execute things in our typical way. We understand like the why of it, like really delivered what client really needed. Actually, we had to adjust quite a bit of our processes because it was a hardware piece that we were working on. So we went through all the cycle, and through it, I think the clients start to really see, oh, like these guys are really trustworthy. They know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. And they brought us into another project and another project. And lo and behold, now like we have this big system that we continue to build. And you would go into a store and would see like it's real life. You can point to it. You can say to your friend, hey, like we built this, and you would show it. And that's very inspiring for engineers because quite often, and for me as well, right? Quite often when you build something, it's maybe some kind of like esoteric piece of technology, right? You would have hard time explaining it to people who are non-technical even, right? And here, like you can literally just point to it and say, we built this, that's what we done. And that's it has a surprising effect on me, and it's really something that I'm quite proud of and quite proud of the team that done it, whereby by doing something small, really small, but
Mm.
doing it really well, like we open up an opportunity to really do a much bigger thing that had a real expression in the real world. So that's one example. I'm sure we have more of those type of things. It's just hard
Sure.
to come up on those.
You raise an
Yeah.
interesting point because quite often quality is often an afterthought in especially fast-paced development environments. From what I'm hearing, you prioritize it. And I'm curious, how do you do that?
So quality is an ongoing evolution for us as well, right? When we were starting out, it was different discipline in software than it is today, and we always try to keep up with it with different approaches and different methodologies and experiment with them quite a bit. So these days, what we do is we try to get to what we call
Mm.
built-in quality, right? So it's not, to us, quality is not something that you slap on at the end of the project where you build a bunch of things and now you get a QA team is like, hey guys, test this
Mm.
and make sure it works well. We try to think about quality from day one essentially, and we try to understand better the environment in which the system will operate, like what level of quality controls are needed, what level of testing is needed, how much of it needs to be automated, how much of it would be practical to be automated, right? Because again, going to a previous example, if you build in a POC for a cash strap startup, automating testing to the fullest extent probably
Mhm.
not a wise spending of the budget, because quite possible that POC after it first encounters the market is going to need to
Yeah.
be rewritten anyway. Conversely, if you're building like a mission critical system, for example, we work on a healthcare device, like in that situation you definitely want to make sure it works
Mm.
very well and you put a lot of effort into it from the get-go. To us it means we need to have somebody who's responsible for quality from day one. The entire team needs to understand what are they
Mm.
building, right? Engineers and designers, infrastructure folks, and what would be needed to really make sure that quality is at a level that is practical for the specific situation. So it may mean designing a system in a particular way that prevents specific type of failure, right? It may mean building a system in a specific way that enables easier testing practices. Maybe it means you using behavioral driven development, or maybe it's a test driven development, right? So understanding the difference between different approaches and where to apply them, that's what it's important to us. And really, in terms of like testing itself and validating that the product does what it's supposed to do, we use quite formal approach, right? Where we document everything, like it's a consistent testing process, and team always know where they at. Essentially they are always understand, yes, it matches the expected behavior, like here's where it fails, here's what needs to be improved. So those are some of the approaches we use. They're quite unique. Every client have their own requirements essentially, and constraints, and business environment in which they operate. So we try to always adapt to it and try to understand like what's needed here, what's not needed, what should be
Mm.
tested, what shouldn't, right, and how to really do it best way.
Brilliant. Now, MEV operates in what I would consider quite a competitive red ocean type market.
Oh yeah.
What are you finding has helped to drive growth for MEV?
Yeah, so definitely, we're in a quite competitive market, needless to say, and I think for us, really, the growth mostly comes from being quite, I would say, I don't want to say innovative necessarily because that's definitely an overused term, but thinking maybe a little bit more outside the box and using different marketing approaches that are more cutting edge. A lot of times, in red ocean type situations, right, when you're competing against a large number of other vendors, you're forced to use marketing tactics that are, they haven't been
Mm.
used before, right? So to us, really, one of the aspect of it is not specifically even focusing on a specific set of tactics because they're going to be outdated in half a year anyway, but building this discipline of experimentation in
Mm.
our marketing team and revenue team that helps us to really, in a disciplined way, run an experiment, understand if it's working or not, improve on it, and then move on to something else, and then move on to something else. So it's like this constant innovation, constant experimentation, but in a disciplined way. I think that really helps. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think is even more important for us, majority of our business is word of mouth, right? And That doesn't happen if clients are not happy with what you do. So we want to focus first and foremost on really delivering the right value at the right price to the client and doing it well, because that really enables us to get repeated business, that the business that helps us to expand our footprint within the clients, especially if it's larger organizations. Yeah, and it helps create, I call them company power champions. So people who really fans of your organization, who really understand that they can trust you and you not going to betray the trust. So that's extremely important for us to get to that level. And it's only possible if you truly shown your value consistently over a long period of time. So that is first and foremost focus for us. And I know this is not really not something you can like, oh, I'm just gonna do that. Like it is, you gotta build to it over many years, and it's the process that never stops. And so that's, I think, what has been really the key driving factor of success for MEV's organization, to really create that great experience for our clients, to great value, do it at the right price for them, and really
Mm.
help them win. That's really our mission. That's really our motto, and we want to live by it. And we want customer to really understand that they can rely on us
So when
for
you
that.
say you're really encouraging experimentation within your marketing and revenue teams, is that
Mhm.
primarily messaging oriented, or is there more to it?
So the way that's how much time do you have? I think the way I look at marketing, and again, like I'm not a marketing professional, I arrive at that model in a sense by just thinking about it and reading things. It might be totally wrong, but the way I view marketing, any marketing tactics has like three components. So to me, it's segmentation, who you're trying to target. It's messaging, like how you actually message them, or engaging with them, very broadly speaking, right? And it's the action. What are you trying to have them do? So using this approach, experimentation can be in any of that, right? So maybe we target a specific type of people with a specific type of messaging that is related to, let's say, a new service that we're trying to launch, right? Or maybe it's the same set of people, same messaging, but we're trying to do, we're asking them to do something else. Instead of, hey, let's schedule a call with us, maybe, hey, read our white paper, for example, right? Or do this, do that. So all of these things, they are experiments to me. But what I'm excited about quite often, and what I brainstorm with my team more, is who are those people who we're trying to help, like what problems they have and how we can actually help them, and then how can we communicate that we would be the right vendor for them. So this is to me like a deep essence of marketing, and this is quite exciting, trying to really find a niche where you can deliver amazing value at amazing price and have very happy customers at the end. That's where this whole exploration process, experimentation process shines to me. Because quite often, is if you do it consistently in a disciplined way, what I found is there are pockets where, despite this being red ocean, there's still underserved markets where you can come in and really construct a service offer in a way that would help people get great value, right, at seemingly like very good price. Like a good example of it is our support service. So what we done there is we noticed that a lot of times when we build something, it needs to be continually supported, but clients don't have enough money to really continue maintaining the team with us, and it's not really cost efficient. So we figure out specifically what the value would be for them. We organize it at much lower price point, and we build processes and systems to help us deliver that kind of consistently over a long period of time without breaking the bank. And clients are quite happy with it, and we're quite happy that we were able to figure it out. And this is like an example of this symbiosis that we're really trying to build in marketing. I feel like if you have the deeper understanding of the market and of the people, like what they need, how they really think about problems, and you construct your messaging around that, then those type of experiments tend to be more successful. The only caveat to that, if your message, if you pick in the wrong channel for that type of message, right, if you're trying to deliver it not where people were really specifically looking for this type of service, right, so you also need to align the channel a little bit more, right? I don't think you want to necessarily market business services, let's say on
Yeah.
Facebook or Instagram. Maybe for some groups you can, I don't really know, but like in our case, that's not really a good channel, right? And probably if you're selling consumer packaged goods on LinkedIn, might be challenging too, right? So you need to really find the right channel, and quite often it is not It is not a thought process. Quite often that's an experiment. So you need to have enough discipline to run it, understand the feedback from it again, and really adjust.
Brilliant. Alex, in this space of being a strategic partner, especially when it comes to software development, do you find there's perhaps a couple of aspects that doesn't get talked about very much or doesn't get much airtime? If so, what would they be?
It's a good question. I think some of the aspects that don't get enough airtime and that we always have to extract a little bit from customers when they come to us is really understanding. Always helps me is understanding what was your previous experience. Have you ever worked with a bad vendor or a good vendor? And let's talk about what was bad and what was good. Because what it helps us to do is understand who you are exactly, what are you valuing, what is your company valuing. So almost like having this cultural alignment, that's very important to me. And very often nobody talks about it. Like in our sales deck, we have our values like on the third or fourth slide, and I talk about them. Before I talk about anything else, I talk about who we actually are, what people you're gonna encounter by working with us. And I'd love to hear the same from the clients, right? Not the standard corporate BS type thing like innovation and customer service is important to us. No, like what type of people really work there? Like what do you value from working with vendor, right? Having that understanding really helps us to get to the right level of collaboration much quicker, and people frequently don't talk about this. Another thing that I always like, I rarely get but I always ask for is budgets, right? Because for us it's not that we trying to maximize our price here, but it is a constraint that we're going to work against. And quite often, if you don't have a level of trust, maybe you just met somebody and they trying to find the right vendor for you, people are very hesitant sharing like what are their financial constraints, what are the budgets, right? But to us and most of engineering firms, this is not really going to screw you and try to like maximize. We're trying to understand how should we build a system. And it's just an additional data point to help us figure it out. Because if you have a very large budget and you have a very sort of a complex system that you want to build, that's one thing. If you have a very large budget but you want to build a smaller system, what I'm going to try to do is try to convince you not to spend this much money, right? And I'll give you like a cheaper options to get to the right value for you. But quite often the situation is such that you want to build something big, the budget is quite small. So this is where we need to become a little bit more innovative and try to figure out how do we actually do it in this situation. Maybe we use a bunch of third-party tools and just weave them together, right? So we don't have to build as much software. Maybe we use some open source technology that's already out there and just customize it for you, right? So it's not gonna really get you exactly what you need, but it's gonna fit into your budget. It's gonna be a practical solution. Yes, you may have to lose some of the nice to haves, but at least you have something at the end and it doesn't break the bank. So I feel like that conversation, ideally, I'd love to see it come earlier in a communication, but quite often it's left until the very end. And I think it could save a lot of time on both sides, right? If we talk in right sizing solution for you. So that's another thing that's quite important that I feel like is not being talked too much in those type of engagements early on, especially. And the third parameter, which quite often we want to understand and we ask for it, like what is your criteria for success? Like quite often people come to us and say, hey, I want to build this. That's great. What are you trying to achieve? And how do you know that you actually succeeded here? Maybe your criteria for success, oh, I actually want to get 10 clients on this, right? So let's talk more about this. Like let's imagine the system is built. Like how are you getting those 10 clients? What are important for them, right? So really what it helps us to do is start to align what we produce towards that specific goal for you. And it help us to prioritize. And understanding that is very important for us as an engineering company because we will be making those decisions in the code. And if we don't understand how you're going to succeed with this and how you're going to judge that success, it's just going to make our work suboptimal and the outcome of it is also suboptimal, right? So that's maybe third element that I quite often have to really push clients to share and explore with us, and then that really helps us to create great value for them and
Excellent.
great outcome.
And if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
I think we talked about a lot of different interesting things. Definitely, I feel like importance of throughout the entire conversation, one sort of trend appeared, and it's really paying attention to the culture, paying attention to
Mhm.
feedback that you're getting, like building this foundational elements of trust. That's probably something that's an important takeaway from here. And really, I feel like having this deep desire to service the client and create value for them, that's another
Mhm.
element that is quite important and permeates our conversation today. The thing is like focusing on the process and having like process ownership and kind of cross team collaboration. A lot of those things are certainly quite critical, but they are not really possible unless you have this
Mhm.
trust and unless you really have the right level of relationship with the client. And that is not possible unless you have good,
Mhm.
productive culture on your team and good team internally. So those are some of the key points that I think we
Terrific.
discussed today. Hopefully, it'll be
I'm sure it
interesting for the
will.
audience.
And if listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to connect with me. If you just search, I have a quite unique last name, so it's easier to do it. Or just shoot me an email, alex@mev.com. I'll always read all emails, respond. Yeah, and I'm happy to
Terrific.
chat.
We'll include links to that in the show notes. Alex, thank you for doing this. It's been brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you
No
so much.
worries.
Thank you for having me.